After the absolute dumpster fire of a nightmare that was the Wii U, Nintendo knew that they had to hit it out of the park when it came to the launch of their next console. However, this idea in of itself presented a problem. How do you show to your consumer that they can actually trust you when it comes to providing a good product after the nightmare that was the last few years for the company? Well, after several teasers and a full-blown presentation, the reveal and perpetual hype of the Nintendo Switch began. And my god, did Nintendo do exactly what they wanted to do with this console. As of me writing this video, the Switch has sold a little over 155 million units. And even though the Switch 2 is a thing now, the console doesn't seem like it's going to be slowing down anytime soon. So because of this, I wanted to take a look back at the life and times of the Nintendo Switch and break down all of the games and excitement that came with every single year of the system. So with that in mind, let's take a look back at the life and times of the Nintendo Switch. Here in the US, the Nintendo Switch launched on March 3rd, 2017, and unlike the very large stutter step that was the Wii U, the Switch actually launched with some actually good games. Outside of the few third-party games that came at release, like Super Bomberman R, we got 3 main first-party games at launch, a far more gimmicky title with 1-2 Switch, a more puzzle multiplayer-based game with snipper clips, and then finally the unarguably magnum opus of the Switch with Breath of the Wild. This game is not only one of the best games that were released on the Switch, but easily one of the best games ever made, and cemented the fact that Nintendo would be going all out with this new console. From here, the Switch's momentum for the year would continue, and my god did we get some fantastic titles this year. The next big title we got next came only a little over a month later, on April 8th, with the release of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Despite this game being a simple Wii U port, which is something that we'll see pop up time and time again during the Switch's lifetime, this is inarguably the best one, and actually ended up becoming the best-selling game on the Switch. After this, we got ARMS on June 16th, and even though everyone was really hoping that this would end up becoming a super good new franchise like Splatoon, the game never really caught on and died off pretty much right after it released. However, speaking of Splatoon, the next entry in the Splatoon series would come to us on July 21st with the release of Splatoon 2, and I think this was just the smartest idea ever to have this series come over to Switch as soon as possible. Despite the Wii U having a very small install base, Splatoon 1 was a surprisingly good hit on the console, so everyone pretty much wanted to see how fast Nintendo would bring the series over. This entry is super good, and even though I'm not a massive Splatoon fan, I think it's really good that we got a second game on the console so soon. Then, on August 29th, we got Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle, and I feel like this is one of the biggest sleeper hits on the entire console. Even though in concept this is like the dumbest idea ever, in actuality it's super fun, and easily one of the best Mario games on the console, and just in general one of the best games to come out on the Switch. However, after all this, the second biggest game of the year released on October 27th, with this of course being Super Mario Odyssey. I mean, what else can I say about this game that hasn't already been said? It's phenomenal and easily the best Mario game ever made, and it's by far the most fun and magical experience I've ever had when playing a game. The final game that released this year was Xenoblade Chronicles 2 a little bit later after Odyssey, and even though I've heard a few mixed things about this game, I'm still really happy that Xenoblade fans got a new game this year. So yeah, I think you can clearly tell that Nintendo's 2017 was an absolute banger and started off the Switch exactly how it needed to. Let's just hope that Nintendo keeps up this momentum for the coming years. After the massive year that was the Nintendo Switch's 2017, Nintendo began to slow down in 2018. And even though we did get a lot of great new games this year, a lot of them were far less exciting than what we got in 2017. Out of all of the games that released this year, we only really got 2 types of games, those being brand new games created for the Switch, and then ports of other games. First off, I'm just gonna focus on the ports because I feel like that's the simplest stuff that we got this year. Now, just like with 2017, the majority of the ports that we got on this console this year were Wii U ports, which in all honesty does make sense. The Wii U was filled with some great games, so it does make sense that Nintendo would want to bring those games over to the much healthier console and kind of give them a second chance at life. But that doesn't really matter because these games are inherently far less exciting. It's such a shame that a lot of the release slots for this year were filled with simple Wii U ports. And even though I think it's super cool that we got games like Captain Toad and Tropical Freeze on the console this year, they're so less exciting than brand new games for the Switch. I mean, some of these ports even launched for more than they costed on the Wii U. which definitely didn't help with the sour taste that these things left in fans' mouths. And even outside of these ports, the new games that were released for the console this year were kinda subpar. Games like Kirby Star Allies, Super Mario Party, and the Let's Go games may be very high quality and you can certainly have your fun in them, but you can't really deny that they're somewhat safer and boring titles. I mean, just take a look at Star Allies for a pure example. Even though this is a fairly high quality Kirby game and I actually do have a soft spot for it in my heart, it's still kind of boring and doesn't do a lot of the fun and creative stuff that the previous Kirby games have been doing. I think what these games more so needed was to be way more experimental and find ways to push the series even further, like taking Kirby and throwing him into a 3D space, which may or may not be something that we'll see in the future of the Switch. However, despite all the mediocrity that came out this year, the biggest game of the year would release in December. That of course being Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. I mean, what can I say about this game that others haven't iterated for years? It's absolutely fantastic, and not only the best Smash game ever made, but one of the most high quality and funnest Nintendo games that I've ever played in my entire life. However, despite Smash Ultimate being a fantastic way to end this year, 2018 was still kinda mid and did not hold up as good as 2017 still does. Let's just hope that Nintendo kinda kicks their asses into gear with 2019. After the kind of mid-year that was Nintendo's 2018, which was mainly filled with a lot of ports of older games, a lot of people were really hoping that Nintendo would go really hard in 2019. However, with the first two games they released this year, it kind of seemed like Nintendo was going to do 2018 all over again. The first two games we got this year were New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, I know, an absolutely mouthful of a title, and Yoshi's Crafted World, and these are definitely somewhat disappointing games. Even though both of these games are fairly fun, they're definitely on the more boring side, and with one of them literally being a Wii U port, a lot of people weren't really impressed. However, after these two releases, the rest of the year was filled with some absolute banger games. We got Super Mario Maker 2, which is not only way better than the original game, but one of the best games released for the console, and is easily one of my favorite games ever made. We got Fire Emblem Three Houses, which might not really be my thing since I'm not really into Fire Emblem, but I've heard really good things about this game, and definitely added onto the already fantastic library that the Switch had. We even got a remake of Link's Awakening, and even though some people might not like the way more toy-like art style of the game, I actually think it looks super good, and this game more than likely introduced a lot of people to 2D Zelda for the very first time. Later on at the end of the year, we also got our first original Pokemon game on the system, and my god were these games controversial. And even though I think Sword and Shield are fairly competent Pokemon games, they're not really that impressive at all, and at the time, it definitely felt like Game Freak wasn't trying to push the series further at all, since they still kept around the original sound effects and gameplay loop that started decades ago. However, my favorite game that released this year was Luigi's Mansion 3, and my god do I love this game. I think it's the prettiest game that we've ever gotten on the Switch, and all of the new gameplay mechanics and creative ideas that they brought over to the series in this new game were so good, and I cannot wait for Nintendo to eventually make Luigi's Mansion 4. Nintendo also released Labo this year, which was a little interesting, but a really weird can of worms that we don't really need to get into right now. So yeah, I think Nintendo's 2019 was pretty solid, and even though I still don't think they had as many heavy hitters as 2017, overall I think it was pretty solid, and hopefully the momentum keeps up in 2020. Now, 2020 would bring a lot of weird stuff for Nintendo that really wasn't their fault. Since COVID spiked this year and basically caused the world to shut down for a good year and a half, Nintendo kind of had to just slide through this year as best as possible, which is very evident looking at the release lineup for this year. However, before all of this, the biggest release of this year would come in early March, that of course being Animal Crossing New Horizons. And my god, was this the absolute perfect timing for this game. I don't know if Nintendo had done some weird voodoo vision shit to find out the perfect release date for this game, but it was the absolute best game to play during quarantine. This game allowed for people to explore and interact with one another for hours and hours on end, and even though some people did get bored of the game very quickly, it was without a doubt the perfect game to play throughout quarantine, and definitely kept a lot of people from going absolutely insane. However, outside of Animal Crossing, the only other really big game that we got this year was Paper Mario the Origami King. Even though this game is super controversial, and definitely not what a majority of people wanted out of the Paper Mario Mario series, I still found it to be really endearing and a really fun time during a period when not a lot of games were releasing. However, outside of these two games, all the other games that were released this year were remakes and re-releases. We got ports of Pikmin 3 and Tokyo Mirage Session Sharp FE from the Wii U, and even full-on remakes of Xenoblade and Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. However, the biggest re-release of this year was undoubtedly Super Mario 3D All-Stars. Look, even though this is a very subpar package, since Nintendo basically did no work to these games, it was still super fun to have these undoubtedly fantastic games on the Switch. However, the thing that sucked about this collection was that it was a limited time offer and would disappear at the end of March of the next year. This is just super lame and something that a lot of fans were very vocal against at the time. And to me, this vocal majority against the limited time release kind of left this game with a very sour taste in my mouth. So yeah, even though it really wasn't their fault, Nintendo 2020 wasn't really all too impressive, and definitely a much lamer year compared to the others. Let's just hope that getting into 2021 and getting away from quarantine, Nintendo can kind of pick up again. Now, after the much slower and inconsistent year that was Nintendo's 2020, a lot of people really didn't have any idea what Nintendo was going to be giving us in 2021. You gotta remember, this was still during the heyday of COVID, so a lot of Nintendo's production teams were working remotely from one another, which definitely caused a lot of their upcoming projects to be pushed back. However, the only game we really knew about came in early February of that year, and my god was it a good one. Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury may at the surface just seem like a simple Wii U port, but my god, is this game so much more than that, and is probably my favorite game that Nintendo released in 2021. Of course, we got the already fantastic 3D World a part of this package, which is one of the best Mario games ever made, but the big new attachment here is Bowser's Fury. This thing is like a combination between Mario Odyssey and 3D World, and it's super good. And mark my words, this side mode is gonna be the blueprint for the next 3D Mario game that we see on the Switch too. However, after this release, Nintendo's lineup would be way less exciting. We got a few remasters after this like Skyward Sword HD, and even a remaster of Miitopia for some reason, and even brand new entries in series that we hadn't seen for a while, like Mario Golf Super Rush and WarioWare Get It Together. Even though most of these releases were fairly high quality, except for Super Rush, which is just one of the worst Mario sports games I've ever played in my life, they still weren't all too exciting. However, all the excitement for this year would come back in late October when Metroid Dread finally released. I mean, what can I say about this game that hasn't already been said like 1,000 times over? It's an absolute banger, and is one of the most high quality games that we've ever gotten on the Switch. I'm just so glad that Metroid Dread was finally realized after being in development hell for years, and definitely introduced a lot of new people to the series, including me. However, this year would kind of go out in a whimper with the Pokemon Diamond and Pearl remakes, which I haven't played but looked very bad. A lot of fans really hate these remakes and definitely added to Pokemon's very spotty and inconsistent output on the Switch. So yeah, even though we got some really good games this year, it was definitely still a bit off, and you could definitely tell that things were still impacted by COVID a little bit. So just here's to hoping that Nintendo finally gets out of this little rut in 2022. Now, after the somewhat messy years that were Nintendo's 2020 and 2021, people were really hoping that Nintendo's 2022 was gonna be really good, and for the most part, it absolutely was. Our first big title of the year came right at us in January with Pokemon Legends Arceus, and this game is finally what everyone had been wanting out of the Pokemon series on the Switch. Look, despite the game graphically looking like absolute dog shit, the game finally pushed the Pokemon series forward with this kind of open world and open combat type of gameplay here. This stuff could be the perfect blueprint for the next mainline Pokemon game, and I really hope that Game Freak takes their time to flesh out a lot of the ideas in this game and make them absolutely perfect for the next Pokemon games. Take quick note of that idea because that will go downhill quickly. And rolling right off of this game, we got Kirby in the Forgotten Land, and oh my god, this is an absolute banger. This is by far the best Kirby game ever, and the game that finally brought the series into 3D after fans had been begging for it for decades. The game just oozes charm and creative energy at every second, and even though some people may not like the more level-based setup, I think it works super well here and allows for pretty much every second of this game to be super creative and really fun. Now, skipping over Mario Strikers Battle League since that game just completely sucks, we got basically 3 games back to back from one another, those being Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Splatoon 3, and then Bayonetta 3. First off, I think it's just really funny that we got the third entry in 3 different series basically back to back from one another, but these games are really good, even though I don't think Splatoon 3 was really necessary January since we already had Splatoon 2 on the console, I'm still really happy that fans of this series got all these new entries. However, our big holiday title for the year would come to us in early November with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which is really weird. If you don't remember from me talking about it like a minute ago, we already got a Pokemon game earlier this year with Pokemon Legends Arceus. So why in the hell are we getting the brand new gens right now? And just by looking at Scarlet and Violet, you can tell how rushed they were. Even though they carried over a lot of the gameplay ideas that were first present in Legends Arceus, like the whole open world thing, it is just abysmal here. And you can tell that Game Freak made basically zero attempts to make the system in Arceus any better. The game is also just broken beyond belief, and basically doing anything in the game will cause it to stutter and basically deload anything that isn't within like a 10-foot radius of you. This is just the worst that Pokemon has ever been on this system, and a really bad step for what they were praying would be the supposed future for the series. So yeah, even though I had a lot of fun during Nintendo's 2022, the holiday titles from this year were just so bad and left a really bad taste in my mouth. Let's just hope that Nintendo keeps a lot of the good momentum that they built this year into 2023. However, moving into Nintendo's 2023, that's when things began to pick up dramatically. And my god, this has to be one of the best years that Nintendo has ever had with the Switch. Now, like most years on the Switch, we did get a few older games remastered and ported onto the console this year, but a majority of these were complete remasters of older games, which I think is just super cool. I'm pretty sure the only straight up ports that we got this year were the Pikmin 1 and 2 collection. And even though it's kind of lame that these aren't full-blown remasters of these games, I'm just really happy that we got all the Pikmin games on the Switch now. However, the full-blown remakes and remasters that we got this year were so good. We got Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe, which is just an absolutely great remaster of the original Wii game and is without a doubt the best version of the game. We got Metroid Prime Remastered, which is just amazing and brought the already fantastic Metroid Prime into the modern day, and more than likely exposed a lot of new players to the Prime series. However, the biggest remake we got this year was a full-on remake of Super Mario RPG, which is just absolutely insane. For years, fans have been begging for a simple port or even a slight remaster of this game, but no one ever thought it would happen. But it did, and this is without a doubt the ultimate way to play this game. Though, outside of all these re-releases and remasters, we got 3 big new games this year, and dare I say that they're basically all 10 out of 10s. In early May, we got the long-awaited Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and man is this game just such a banger. Look, some people may complain about this game being way too similar to Breath of the Wild, like with it basically sharing the exact same overworld, but that never really bothered me because the overworld in Breath of the Wild was already so great. I mean, this game also brought about probably one of the best versions of Ganon that we've ever seen, so obviously it's kind of peak. Now, going into the summer, we also got one of the most long-awaited Nintendo games ever, that being Pikmin 4. I love how much this game changes up the Pikmin formula, and even though the addition of Odie does make the game a whole lot easier, him along with a lot of the other new additions to this game are just so good that I can't really complain at all here. However, the last major title of the year and my favorite game that Nintendo put out this year was Super Mario Bros. Wonder. This game is just amazing and helped to bring the 2D Mario formula that was pretty boring and generic thanks to the new Super series and completely flipped it on its head thanks to all the new ideas in this game. Look, this is by far my favorite 2D Mario game ever made, and I just love all the new and creative ideas that this game brought into the Mario series. So yeah, Nintendo's 2023 was super good and probably the closest thing we'll ever get to the hype of their 2017. However, moving into 2024, basically everyone knew that this was going to be a much slower year for the Switch, since this was the last year that the Switch was going to be Nintendo's primary system. And you can clearly tell that by the games that released this year. Despite this, we still got a lot of really good titles that released this year, and some of them are some of the most interesting games that we've ever gotten on the Switch. The year started off pretty odd with a remake of Mario vs. Donkey Kong, and even though this is obviously a much simpler title, I still really like it. Look, I'm such a sucker for these Mario and Donkey Kong games, and for a series that I was basically 100% certain was going to be left behind on the Wii U and 3DS, I'm so happy that we got a brand new game from this series, even if it's just a remake. After this, we got Princess Peach Showtime, which is really cool since Peach finally got another solo game after years. But to me, this game is just so boring and dumbed down that I don't really have anything else to say about it. However, the most hype and arguably best title to come out this year was a remake of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. I mean, what can I say say about this game that hasn't already been said? It's absolute peak when it comes to Mario RPGs, and is easily one of the best Mario adventures ever. I'm just so happy that Nintendo finally went around and remade this game, and I really hope they take a lot of what makes this game special and praised and apply it to the future of the Paper Mario series. Next, we got Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, which is just one of the saddest ports that I've ever seen on the console. And with it basically getting no new additions to the game, even graphically, I don't even want to talk about it that much. Something really cool that we got later this year was The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, which is a fully brand new 2D Zelda game where you actually play as Zelda. This is super cool, and even though it's a little lame that all of the assets from this game are ripped from the 2019 Link's Awakening remake, I still think it's really cool, and I like all the new copy abilities that you have in this game. After this, the final two games for this year will come out pretty much back to back from one another, and both of them are really good new additions in their given series. These two games are of course Super Mario Party Jamboree and Mario and Luigi Brothership, and my god are these games good. Jamboree is such a great return to form for the Mario Party series after years of mediocrity, and despite its way too long runtime, Brothership is a great new addition to the Mario and Luigi series, and I'm so happy that the series came back after years of absence. So yeah, even though this year was full of remakes and re-releases, I still think Nintendo's lineup was super good this year. However, going into the Switch 2, I wonder if Nintendo is still going to be making a majority of games focused around the Switch 1. Despite the Switch 2 finally launching this year, and obviously being Nintendo's main focus from here on, the original Switch actually got a bunch of first-party titles. Now, very similar to 2024, the majority of games that released for the Switch 1 and 2025 were simple ports and remasters of older games, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's an awful thing. In early January, we got Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, and I feel like this is the best and also worst version of the game. Look, I'm really happy that they finally put this game on the Switch alongside Tropical Freeze, but I feel like this is one of the laziest remasters that Nintendo has ever done. I mean, just compare the original Wii game to this HD version, and even though the HD version does definitely look better, its betterness is by like the smallest margin imaginable. Look, I know this game did get an update for the Switch 2, but we're talking about the Switch 1 here, and it looks pretty awful on the Switch 1. After this, in March, we would get the long-awaited port of Xenoblade Chronicles X, and I feel like this is one of those Wii U ports that no one ever thought would ever happen. If you don't know, this game basically ran off of hopes and dreams back on the Wii U, so no one really thought that Nintendo was going to take the time and effort to optimize the game for the Switch, but I'm really happy that they did, and I think it's so cool that we finally have all the Xenoblade games on the Switch. However, the best games to come out on the Switch 1 this year were the Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 collection in early October. Look, I know it's a little lame that we got Mario Galaxy re-released again on the Switch, since it was only a limited time thing with 3D All-Stars back in 2020, but it's still the Galaxy games, so they're so good. I mean, this collection finally brought Galaxy 2 to the Switch after years of begging for it, so honestly, I think it's a win in anyone's book. I also think these are probably the best versions of these games, since they're now available on Nintendo's modern console, and they also look super good in these ports. Now from here is when we start to get into the actual original games that were built for the Switch 1 this year, and my god are they a little bit rocky. A few days after the Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 collection, Pokemon Legends ZA released, and my god does this continue Pokemon's awful consistency on the Switch. This game just feels so unfinished, and even though you can kind of tell that they prioritized the Switch 2 version of this game during development, I don't think this version of the game is acceptable at all. However, the final big title for this year would come to us in early December with Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, and thank god this game finally released. Look, despite your opinions on this game, it's still really cool that Nintendo kept their initial promise and finally released this game, and even though this game isn't what people wanted out of a Prime 4 game like at all, I'm still really glad that it finally released. So yeah, even though the Switch 1 got a good many titles this year, you can kind of tell that this was the final big stand for the Switch. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Even though there's some games that I didn't really touch on this video, and there's also a whole bunch of major third-party games that release on this console, this script is already big enough, so I think I'm just gonna leave it here. And before anyone says anything, yes, I know that the Switch 1 is still gonna be getting major first-party games in 2026, mainly Tomodachi Life Living the Dream, which looks absolutely sick. I think this game was still primarily built in mind for the Switch 2, so I'd more so count it there. I think this video helped me realize just how good of a library the Switch 1 has, and if you're interested in any of these games, I totally recommend trying them, because more than likely it's an absolute banger and has a good chance at being one of your favorite games ever. Here's to hoping that the Switch 2 at least has a somewhat comparable library to the Switch 1, because it's got a long legacy to live up to.